Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. We'll just wait a couple seconds so that some others can join us because we get started right on time. Oh, okay. All right. Welcome, and thank you for participating in our webinar, 5 Common Pet Nutrition Questions. I'm Claudia Loomis, co-owner of Cherrybrook, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator this evening. Cherrybrook is very excited to have Bryan Nieman, brand director and 5th-generation family member of Fromm Family Pet Food, as our host and presenter tonight. Bryan has been immersed at Fromm all his life. His depth and knowledge and literally his entire lifetime of experience make him uniquely qualified to help us gain a deeper understanding of pet nutrition and help us explore the answers to 5 common pet nutrition questions. Before I turn it over to Bryan, there are just a couple of light housekeeping items. The presentation should be about 50 minutes. There will be time at the end of Bryan's formal presentation for Bryan to answer some of your specific questions. You do not need to wait until the end of the presentation to chat in your questions. You can type your questions in the chat bar at any time during the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and each participant will receive an email with a link to the recording within the next 24 to 48 hours. And if we do not get to your specific questions this evening, I welcome you to please email me directly, and I will do my best to answer your questions or direct you to the resources that will be able to. I have, at the top of the chat bar, I have included my email address. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bryan. Bryan, can you share a little bit about your background, your family, and your family business? And then we'll get to that first question.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Claudia.
My pleasure.
And hello, everybody out there. Let me give you a little bit of background here. First off, let's just go over the questions we're going to answer tonight. So I know some of these were submitted by some of your customers out there, Claudia, so we're going to make sure to get through all of them. First off, what is a balanced and complete diet? Are there benefits to rotating your pet's diet? What are the differences between foods formulated for adult, puppy, senior, and all life stages? Why are legumes and pulses common ingredients in pet food? And what are ancient grains and how do they differ from traditional grains? So we'll get to those, but first, a little bit of background. This is my immediate family here. I also do have a sister, but she wasn't in our business photo. It's my dog, Isabel, who's sleeping behind me in her crate. I don't know if you guys can see that. My brother's dog, Gracie. We've been in business 117 years, 5 generations, and the entire time we've kept it, the entire business under the umbrella of the family. So no outside business interests, and that's the way we like it. If you don't know much about us, like I said, we've been family owned and operated since 1904. We developed the canine and feline distemper vaccine and launched that to the public in 1939. In 1949, we introduced the concept of premium pet food to the world with the launch of Fromm Complete Dog Meal, which is pictured here. That was backed by the largest scale feeding trial ever conducted up until that point in history. And really up until, I'm not aware of any larger scale feeding trial that's been done ever since as far as what nutrients dogs and cats need to thrive on. In the 1980s, we were one of the first companies to use natural preservatives. And in 2003, my dad launched Fromm 4-Star Nutritionals, which was the first pet food that you could rotate between varieties as often as you like. My dad, his background is chemical engineering. He went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, got his degree there. And when he came back to the family business, he was the direct understudy of Dr. Willard Roberts. Dr. Roberts was a biochemist and animal researcher. And Doc taught my dad how to formulate pet foods and exactly how to optimize extrusion to create high quality pet food. So my dad studied under him for over 15 years up until Doc passed away in the year 2000. And what I like to say is it reminds me of how skills were passed down in Europe in the 16th century, where if you want to learn a skill and become a master of it, you learn it from the people that have been doing it their whole life and have garnered that skill from whoever came before them. That's how my dad learned about nutrition to supplement his technical background. He would stay up at night. I remember as a kid, my dad wouldn't come home for dinner till like 8 or 9 o'clock at night because he was sitting and studying with Doc Roberts after business hours, looking through his notes and learning about nutrition. So I have a lot of respect for that, and it's made a huge impact on how I've learned the business and how I look at the world. We're a Wisconsin-based business. Go Packers, go Brewers, go World Championship Bucks. We make all of our food here in Wisconsin. We've got Mequon's, where our first production facility was built in 1925. Today, it is our primary research and development facility. We do about 10% of our dry food there. We just launched a town center where we have our own microbrewery and restaurant. And also have built a space for families to gather and other small businesses to open up as well. And we just finished opening up our brand new headquarters in that town center. So we're pretty excited about that. Columbus, Wisconsin is where our primary dry food production facility is. This has been in operation since 2009. This does 90% of our dry food production. We opened a cannery in 2015 in Eden, Wisconsin. We reacquired our original family farm where the company started in 1904, just a few years back. And today we have a hobby farm there. We raise pigs, cows. We tap maple trees. We got a sunflower seed patch, bunch of other stuff too. Some of that supplies our restaurant, and some of it is just kind of learning the entire food supply chain from start to finish. And then in Germantown, which is near Mequon and Milwaukee here, we've got 2 treat production facilities. So we've been expanding pretty rapidly over the past 10 years or so. But one thing we like to do is keep it all under the family umbrella, so we have complete control over the production of our products. That's my dad. He's the 4th generation leader of the company. He's still incredibly involved in every single piece of the company, sometimes more than my brother and I like probably. But that's just, it's in his blood, and he really took the company from potentially going out of business in the early 1980s to now we are the #1 pet food sold at independent and neighborhood pet stores in North America. So he's done quite a bit, so it's all near and dear to him. So he still stays incredibly involved in R&D, marketing of our products. It wouldn't be odd to find him plowing the snow from our Wisconsin winters here at our plant in Mequon, because that's just what he grew up doing. He always knows what the pulse is, knows if he can hear something in the plant. He'll know that something's a little bit off with the extruder. He'll be going down, talking to the crew, saying, "Hey, did you think about this? Did you notice that?" Just incredibly involved. My mom, she was here the entire time, going through our explosive growth in the 2000s. She still signs every check that we give to our suppliers and vendors, and still works. She's down to 4 days a week, supplementing my dad's about 90-hour work week is a typical work week for my dad. But luckily, she gets out a little bit more than my dad does. This is my brother Dan and I. Both of us went through an immersion program in the company, which essentially was pretty much our life. But in addition to that, we spent a year learning every major aspect of the production process in the plant. So I worked in our receiving area. I worked in our meat and produce area. I worked in our extrusion area, all through packaging, and in our quality control labs. It was very important to our dad that we learn every aspect of the production process to give us a good grounding on the business. So we've kind of learned all that as a basis. Day to day, though, I'm more on the sales, marketing, digital database side of things. My brother is on the production side of things. So he still schedules every batch of dry dog and cat food that we make on a weekly basis. Also is in charge of ordering and procuring all of our packaging, which is pretty intense. My name's Bryan Nieman, Fromm Family Pet Food. You're probably wondering why. We could spend 3 hours just going through the history, but this is a little family tree tracing back to when the Nieman and Fromms immigrated from Germany back in 1852 and 1853. And you can see here we were farmers to begin with, and then the first generation of our family business started with my great-great-grandfather, who started the first banks and canneries in the local areas here. And you can see here how after generation, the business has been passed down. My brother Dan and I are all teed up to be the leaders in the next generation here. So pretty incredible story. Typically, these webinars will be put on by our nutritionist, Danielle Opetz. Unfortunately, she's a little bit tied up. Pretty cool watching her learn and grow in her career. I hired her in customer service a long time ago, and she was studying veterinary medicine at that time. She actually since then pivoted her studies, and she's gotten her master's degree in animal science, and she is currently getting her PhD in nutritional sciences, specifically in companion animals. So she's currently tied up doing trials and scientific work down in Illinois currently for her PhD. So I've been kind of picking up the slack a little bit for our presentations here. So I don't know if that's better or worse that you guys got me, but shout out to Danielle. And also she's got a much more broad technical background than I do. Again, I've gleaned a lot just growing up in the business and learning from the people here, very smart and talented people that I work with. But if you do have more technical questions, I will be the first to say that I can't answer it. I'm not going to sit here and spin around trying to spin something up as an answer. I would rather defer you to people like Danielle and other people in our organization that can give you as technical of an answer as you're looking for. So honestly, if you have a question that I can't answer or something comes up that's involved in specific nutrition questions or you have a special need with your dog or cat, please call us and you can ask for Danielle by name or literally email Danielle at frommfamily.com and she'll get back to you. We still have that small family feel, and we're very proud of it. So I'm going to be going through we want to talk about complete and balanced pet food. So we're going to be talking about some technical things. The basis of my knowledge on those topics come from this guy pictured right here. His name's Eric Morris, and he is a PhD biochemist, and he approached my dad over 2 decades ago to produce a sled dog food, and that food is called Red Paw. And the Red Paw dog food is fed to the majority of top finishers in the Iditarod sled race that occurs every year up in Alaska. So this guy has done incredible feeding trials and research in his field, and he's lived with over 50 dogs at one point. Literally, him and his 50 dogs off the grid, out in the wilderness, just living life off the land with his dogs. And he's told me before that he could do without people, but he could never do without his dogs. So this is the guy that I've really gleaned a lot from. The way he talked about nutrition and explained it was some of the best ways that I was able to absorb it. So that's where a lot of the information I'm going to talk about comes from, is from him. So I always try to give him a shout out because he's made a tremendous impact to my understanding of pet food as a whole. All right, with that, let's just talk about what goes into all Fromm products. So whether you buy our classic food, which is kind of an entry price point, or you buy our 4-star food, which it's one of the more expensive dog foods out there, every single dog food with the Fromm name on it is going to incorporate these key attributes. First is premium ingredients. We've got purpose-driven ingredients from vetted suppliers. So every single ingredient in our food is going to serve a specific purpose for the overall health and nutrition of the animal, or no fillers, I guess you could say. We've got raw meat or fish as the first or primary ingredient in our foods prior to cook. So what that means is if you turn over any bag of Fromm dog or cat food, the first listed ingredient is going to be either like duck or chicken or lamb. What that means is it was raw when we put it in to the mix before extrusion. What that does is it gives us a bit more bioavailability to the protein than we would if we were to only use dried protein ingredients. When I say prior to cook, that means because when you put raw meat or fish into a pet food, as soon as you cook it, you're going to lose about 90% of that weight via moisture in the product. So you really only have about 10% that's not water. So if we were to only put raw meat or fish into pet food, you would end up not having much meat at all in the product if we didn't back up those protein ingredients with something like a chicken meal or a duck meal or a salmon meal. So you'll see pretty much always you look at the first ingredient is going to be fresh meat. Second ingredient is going to be a high protein content meal that we're going to put second in the product. We've got select live viable probiotic cultures in all of our dry dog and cat foods. My dad's been working with the same probiotic supplier here in Wisconsin for over 20 years. He works directly with the owner of that company, and that the owner of that company has done his own studies as far as what probiotic cultures work best in the gut of a dog and a cat. And if you're a label watcher, you'll notice over the years we've slightly modified our probiotic culture and our pet foods based on that research. So really cool to see that evolve over time. So first, ingredients. Next, meticulous preparation. I like to say that there's a lot of weight put on ingredients in pet food. Sometimes that's all people look at. They consider the ingredient panel the be all end all as quality of a pet food. And in my stance on it is that can only be as good as how you prepare it. If you've got your grandma's chicken soup recipe and you don't follow that the way that you're supposed to, you're probably supposed to cook that bone for a couple days at a time, or a day, 24 hours, to extract all those nutrients out of the bone. Then she's probably going to have you dice things up into specific size pieces. You're going to put things into that in a different order. All those things are going to impact not only the flavor, but the digestibility of what you're making. And that could never be more true than in a pet food, where you're relying on us to provide pretty much all the nutrients your dog or cat needs aside from water in their diet. So how you prepare those ingredients, to me, is equally, if not more important than the ingredients that you put in the food. And for us, we prepare our own foods. This might seem like a no-brainer when you're talking to a pet food company, but to be honest, the majority of pet food companies have somebody else make their food. They'll usually have some insight into what they want the food to look like or what ingredients they want to use, but typically they actually have that produced somewhere else, and a lot of times even formulated by some other company, and then they stick their brand name on it. With Fromm, we do it in-house. We use a unique hands-on production process developed by my dad and Dr. Willard Roberts. So this production process is very different than other pet food manufacturers. Doc Roberts developed the method for extruding pet food with meat, with fresh meat and fish in it. He was with Fromm until the late 1960s, and then he actually went out and he was a consultant for other pet food companies when he left us. And one of the things he did as a consultant was design and create the process of extruding pet food with fresh meat and fish. First product to come out with that process was Eukanuba back in the 1970s. And then when my dad came back to the business after his studying and getting his degree, my dad called on Doc Roberts and said, "Hey, would you come back to Fromm? I really could use some help with the company, and I really want to learn how to formulate pet foods." And of course, Doc Roberts came back to the company then back in 1985 and brought his knowledge on how to extrude pet foods with high meat inclusion along with him. So we have not changed the basic principles of how we extrude pet food since then. We still use manually operated extruders. That's what you're seeing over here on the right. These are manually adjustable steam injectors on the head of our extruder, where our extruder operators can manually change these levers to adjust the amount of steam being injected at the one of the most critical points in the cooking process. A typical pet food manufacturer, this is all going to be automated by a computer. And a computer can get pretty close and can make a good dog food. But for us, the ability to get your hands on the product, this is a picture of my dad pulling apart a kibble. My dad can actually see how digestible that product's going to be by pulling that apart, looking at the elasticity of the product. It's going to show him how much of that starch has been converted and exactly where it's at in the cooking process. So put it in his teeth and by feel, by taste, by texture, we can tell if we're going to end up with a product that we'd want to put our name on, an extremely digestible pet food. It allows us to eke out that last bit of digestibility in the product by knowing exactly what we're looking for, because production is going to be affected by different seasonality, what season you're making the product in, depending on atmospheric pressure outside. It's going to be dependent upon the raw ingredients. We're using a lot of natural ingredients that, again, are going to have their own variability. So we're always going to be dealing with something. So to be able to know exactly what that product is supposed to look like is incredibly important. It also allows our extruder operators to understand what goes into making a pet food. So they understand the principles at play. They know when they adjust certain parameters in the extrusion process, what they're doing. Not only does it allow them to be consistent with our product, but it also gives them a great sense of pride that they are experts in their field and they have gained a lot of knowledge working here. So something that we're very proud of. And then we also are one of the only pet food manufacturers to process our own raw fish, fruits, and vegetables on site. Typically, a pet food manufacturer, if they're even using raw meat, fish, fruits, and vegetables, that's typically processed and turned into a slurry at their supplier. We get this stuff in whole and we process it on site. Very, very unique. Here's one of those grinders that's going to process that food. Here's the meat grinder where we can take a frozen block of raw beef and turn it into ground beef within the blink of an eye. And then safety is the next kind of cornerstone of what goes into all of our products. So the ingredients, the preparation, that wouldn't really matter if we couldn't make a safe product, right? You rely on us to make sure that what we're providing your dog and cat is not going to hurt them, is not going to make them sick. So we've got on-site quality control labs at each plant for raw and finished goods testing. So that means we've got, when people show up with a load of maybe it's whole barley or chicken meal, we'll actually go out, we'll take a sampler, stick it in the back of that hopper in the truck. And before we even let that trucker unload into our facility, we bring it back. We have a wet lab. We have infraspectrometers where we can do analysis on that raw ingredient. And we're able to run tests to look for bad things like aflatoxin. That's something you might find in a grain ingredient. That's been attributed to a lot of problems in pet food over time. We're able to look for those things before we ever accept that load of raw ingredient into our facility. And I'm telling you, the people that work in that area of our plant take no greater pride than turning away trucks. So if they find something, they say, hey, this isn't quite up to snuff. You didn't meet this, or this, and we're not going to be able to accept this load. Not only does that make an impression on that truck driver, but the fact that they couldn't unload their entire hopper of ingredient sends a clear message back to the supplier that Fromm does not take any subpar ingredients at any time. We've got we have a quality control lab throughout the process. So as we're extruding pet food, we'll actually take that product, ground it up, and look for kind of the vitals of that product. We're looking at moisture level, ash level, protein level, fat level in the product to ensure that it's that there isn't any changes throughout the production process. Once we get to packaging, this is what you're looking at here is an auto sampler where we're taking a couple kibbles between every bag of dog food that we fill. And throughout that bagging process that will fill dozens of pallets of pet food. At the end of that, we're going to have a composite sample. So taking a couple kibbles between every bag, we end up with a bag like this. This bag then will be split in half, and we're going to send half of that product over to our third-party accredited lab down in Illinois to run testing on. They're looking for pathogenic bacteria, things like E. coli, salmonella, and they're going to review that, and then not until we get clearance back from that third-party lab will we allow that product to leave our warehouse. The other half of this is going to go into a retain sample. We retain every single batch of dog food or cat food through well past the best before date on the package. So if you were to have a problem with let's say our chicken olive edge dog food 9 months from now, and you were to call us, we'd be able to go, if we had any indication that there might be a problem with that batch of chicken olive edge dog food, we would go back to this retain sample, which would be essentially from the exact same production run that you're looking at with the product in your pantry. And we can see if we see any similarities, and potentially if there's any problem with the production, we could then run our own testing on it right here in-house, in addition to potentially having you return some of that product to us to look at. And then we've built an approved supplier program which is above and beyond anything that the regulatory agencies ask of us. So, of course, we're under the jurisdiction of the FDA and the USDA, and they'll do pop-ins. They'll show up at our door, and we have to let them in, and they can pretty much run anywhere they want around our production facilities, ask to look at any production records. We have all that available to them. But that's just the bare minimum to us. We go above and beyond that. Our approved supplier program means if you want to become a supplier for Fromm, you need to meet all these specifications we have for each raw ingredient, and we have to actually go out to your facility and inspect it ourselves to ensure that it meets our quality standards before you ever can become a supplier of Fromm. We just don't go out to the market and say, oh, where's the cheapest chicken meal that we can get it from? No, we have a specification for what is Fromm chicken meal and what parameters does it need to fall within. And then we need to go out and look at how that's being produced before we're going to allow that to become an ingredient in our pet food. And then finally, the fourth core thing that goes into all of our products is the people. I think I've kind of covered that through the last three things, but it all comes down to people in business. It's the people that make things work. And we're family owned and operated. We've got a ton of pride in what we do. And we've got an extremely proud, highly skilled extended family because we lean a lot more on teaching and people looking to learn than we do trying to hire people with the perfect resume, because anyone can put together, I think, a nice resume, but actually what you get in here and can do and grow as a person and grow your skill set is really, I think, where the magic happens. So that's it. Premium ingredients, meticulous preparation, uncompromising safety, and dedicated people go into all of our products. So with that, I'm going to move on to the first question, which is, what is a balanced and complete diet? To talk about that, we should really talk about the basics of nutrition. And the basic nutrition come down to nutrients. And nutrients are categorized into two different categories. You've got macronutrients, which are needed in larger quantities, and micronutrients, which are needed in smaller quantities. So if we break these down into exact nutrients, we're looking at, on the macro side, fat, protein, and carbohydrates. And on the micro side, that's where the vitamins and minerals are going to come into play. So this, if you have these in the right amounts, you're doing pretty good. But there's one vital nutrient that's not listed here, which is actually the most important nutrient that you need for your dog or cat and yourself. And hopefully you guys are answering out loud and I can't hear you right now. But that nutrient is water, which is basically important for every function that the body does. Whether that is, it carries nutrients in and out of the body, it aids in digestion, it helps your body absorb nutrients, making sure your dog or cat has adequate access to water. For me, it's actually, I give my dog her entire intake of water with her food every day to make sure she's getting adequate amount of water, because our food can't work if we don't have that most important nutrient. But anyway, aside from water, we're looking at fat, protein, vitamins, and minerals. Focusing on the macronutrients, in terms of a dog or a cat, these nutrients are going to play different roles or be optimized for different parts of what the dog or cat needs. The primary use of fat in a dog or cat is for energy. The primary use of protein is protein synthesis, or the process of creating protein molecules. And carbohydrates does a ton of stuff. It does provide energy, fiber. Carbohydrates are where you get prebiotics, which are going to feed probiotics. It works towards your blood clotting capabilities and more. There's a ton that carbs can do for us, including some high quality fiber to help kind of the gut and everything move along. When we're looking at what these things kind of break down to, so fats are made up of individual fatty acids. Here I've got a triglyceride pictured with, this has got a glycerol backbone on it. Protein here, protein is a chain of amino acids. So a protein is going to break down into individual amino acids. And then carbohydrates, you've got either monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides, oligosaccharides. And then these macro proteins are going to break down into their smaller counterparts. So looking at how they break down, well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about protein. So protein here is made up of individual amino acids, and then each protein is going to be a different chain of amino acids. So here I've got little circles, little colored circles that are showing what an amino acid is comprised of. So each of these little balls is going to, a different color is going to be a different amino acid. So you can see we've got two of the orange amino acid, one of the blue, one of the pink, or I'm sorry, two of the pink, one of the purple. If we look at something like salmon, you can see here, we've got 2 blue amino acids, 2 orange amino acids, and it kind of changes. So we're looking at proteins as how they break down into their individual amino acids, because the body doesn't need protein, it needs amino acids. So when we're looking at formulating pet foods, we're looking at what animal or fish proteins are we going to use to supply those individual amino acids that the dog or cat needs. So you're even going to find a little bit of protein in some of our carbohydrates that we might use. Some of the what you consider fat ingredients would actually have a little bit of protein too, but the more complex and longer chain of amino acids are going to be found in those meat and fish proteins. And then we have egg, which is the most complex protein known to man, where we have the most amount of amino acids. It's the most complete protein that we are aware of currently, that scientists have discovered. And then when we look at specific animal proteins, from there you have different chains of amino acids based on the type of beef that you might be using. So beef heart is going to be a different amino acid chain than beef liver. So by using different parts of the animal, we can start to build a different amino acid profile by mixing those together. So that's why you'll see a lot of times you might see 2 different meat or 3 different meat or animal proteins in our products, because we're blending those to meet a specific amino acid profile. So that's the macro ingredients: fat, protein, and carbohydrates. So of course your dog or cat's going to eat those. So we're going to create that. We're going to make a nice, complete, and balanced diet. Your dog or cat's going to eat those. It's going to go into their mouth, down their esophagus here, and then in their body they're going to have digestive enzymes that then break down those nutrients. So when we look at digestive enzymes, we're talking about things like lipase, which are going to break down free fatty acids, and it's going to be secreted into the pancreas and the small intestine. That's where the lipase comes from. We've got a digestive enzyme called protease that's going to break down protein. So this is also secreted by the pancreas and small intestine, and it works to break down protein into individual amino acids. So that's going to attack the proteins. You can see there that chain of circles or balls has now been broken up into free fatty acids. Free amino acids. And then a digestive enzyme like amylase is going to break down those carbohydrates into glucose. So your dog or cat actually doesn't have a need for carbohydrates. They don't have a need for carbohydrates, because they can create the necessary glucose they need by utilizing things like fat and protein to create glucose. But for us, you're always pretty much going to see us using a fair amount of carbohydrates in our diets, because it's more efficient for your dog or cat to break down carbohydrates into glucose. It's less taxing on the body. So we're going to utilize the carbs here to create the needed glucose for the dog or cat. Also, when you're breaking down carbohydrates, you're going to have fiber that's going to be left behind. That's going to be things that the body can't break down. And those are going to be carbs that are resistant to the chemical digestion. And we're going to classify those into, it's classified into dietary fiber. And then from there, we're going to have soluble and insoluble fibers. And this is where you start getting into some really cool stuff like prebiotics. That's going to make it all the way down into the gut of your dog or cat. And it's going to be able to feed some of those beneficial probiotics that we put into the food. All right, so now we've broken down these macronutrients. They're in their, they're now finally into a form that the bloodstream can absorb. So we're going to leave behind, of course, our dietary fiber. Your body can't break down everything. You're always going to have a little bit of excess that's going to end up being excreted by the body in either the urine or feces. So some of that's going to be left behind to work its way further down the digestive tract. But then we're going to have the nutrients we're really after to help your dog or cat not only live another day, have their energy needs met, but also thrive and grow like they're supposed to. So complete and balanced. So those are the nutrients that we need to work with. And now we need to make a complete and balanced diet. So when we're creating a complete and balanced diet here at Fromm, first thing we want to do is look at the energy needs of the dog or cat. We want to provide enough energy to keep the dog or cat going, and then balance that with all the other things that we need to do. So other things that we need to do. What's everything else? So first we need to give your dog or cat the energy they need to survive another day. And then we also need to maybe repair, replace damaged blood cells, replace red blood cells, maintain brain function. You've got water electrolyte balance, the hormone regulatory process. And then finally, one of the main indicators of a healthy dog or cat, we've got skin, teeth, and their nice shiny coat. Those are things that we're going to need to address after we meet the energy needs. They need to be able to have enough energy to keep going. So when we're formulating a diet, do you know what macronutrient we should be considering first? So if we look back at earlier when we talked about the primary uses of these macronutrients, we had fat, protein, and carbohydrates. And if you remember, fat, primary use is energy, protein is protein synthesis, and carbohydrates does a whole myriad of different things. So when we're looking at formulating a dog food or a cat food, we look at fat first because fat is a dog or cat's primary energy source. So we're always going to look at fat first, and then we're going to balance the rest of the diet against the amount of fat that we're putting into a food. So we'll put fat on this side of the scale, meaning that we have a finite amount of fat that we're going to use as the basis of our formulation. And then with that fat, we're going to balance the protein, carbs, vitamins, minerals, and fiber against that fat to create a complete and balanced diet. If you were to say, try to take protein as your main goal of formulating a pet food, and then try to balance the fat, carbs, vitamins, minerals, and fibers against that, it becomes very hard. And one thing that we see a lot in pet food is this like race to have the most amount of protein in your dog or cat food, with this flawed idea that the more protein that you have in your food makes it a better food. Why that is, it's just a thing that's happened in pet food for a long, long time. I mean, we're going back all the way back into the 60s and 70s. This has been a thing. Like, put more protein in the food, you're able to market it as a better dog food. Well, if we did that and we tried to make it just a really, really high protein dog food, it becomes nearly impossible to create a complete and balanced diet because we just have too much protein that we can't adequately balance the other nutrients against that amount of protein. If we want to look at exactly why fat is such a good energy source, let's look at metabolic energy. So here we're looking at a graph of metabolic energy per kcals per 1 gram of either carbohydrates, protein, or fat. With carbohydrates, we get 3.5 kcals per 1 gram of carbohydrates. With protein, we get 3.5 kcals per 1 gram of protein, of metabolic energy. With fat, we get a whopping 8.5 kcals per 1 gram of fat. So it's a much more efficient way to supply energy to a dog or a cat. So again, like we look at primary uses. So again, fat's the best way to supply energy to your dog or cat. You could use protein, and that's what happens in some of these really high protein diets. Your dog is actually converting protein into energy, which can be very taxing on their digestive system. With a Fromm product, we're always going to utilize fat because it's the most efficient and the least taxing on your dog or cat. Because when you're trying to convert carbohydrates or protein into energy, you're not only taxing the body, but you're using up that nutrient to do something else, as opposed to feeding them more optimally, by meaning that you're not going to feed them more protein because they need to convert it, where you can actually feed them something that's more optimized for what you're trying to get after, which is the energy needs of the animal. So one way you can look at this, looking at a bag of dog food, I get this question, well, okay, Brian, if fat is the most important and what you need for energy, well, why do you have more protein in your dog food or cat food? So if you look at the back of an Adult Gold, this is our best-selling product nationwide, North America. It's got minimum 25% protein and minimum 16% fat. These are minimums, so there's actually a little bit more, and we do publish our typical analysis on our website if you're curious about that. But when you're comparing dog foods, typically in the back of a dog or a cat food, you're only going to see minimums. So let's just use minimums as a talking point here. So if I look at protein, and if I were to say, hey, I don't really care about fat, I want to get the majority of my energy from my protein, we'll say let's take 25% protein times 3.5 kcals per gram of protein. That gives me 87.5 kcals of energy per 100 grams of food, if I only wanted to use my protein as energy. Now, if I take fat, that's 16% fat, and I say 16% fat times 8.5 kcals per gram of energy, which is what we get out of fat for energy in a dog or a cat, that's going to yield 136 kcals of energy per 100 grams of food. So you can see here, even though we used less fat in our product, we're actually yielding more energy for the dog or cat, and it's just more efficient at supplying energy for a dog or a cat. Taking a little bit deeper dive into protein. So you probably consider protein like I did before I kind of started getting into the weeds with this with Eric on exactly what goes into formulating pet food and how it breaks down into a dog or cat's body. I thought, oh yeah, protein. You got things like beef and chicken and salmon, and yeah, your dog and cat needs them because they supply your dog and cat with, I knew there was a thing called amino acids and that your dog and cat need them. I know I need them, but I didn't really exactly know what was all at play. And Eric told me that, we don't really look at necessarily what the animal or fish protein source is. We look at what amino acids do those break down into. We're not really after duck or chicken. We're after specific amino acids. Amino acids. What's an amino acid? Well, there's 22 amino acids that make up everything in the universe. There's protein in, of course, animal and fish ingredients. There's also protein in leather. There's protein in plastic. There's protein in almost everything on Earth. And there's 22 amino acids that's going to make up that protein in pretty much everything in the universe. 20 amino acids are needed for dogs, cats, and humans to grow and function properly. Of those 20 amino acids, there's 10 essential amino acids for humans and dogs. These are amino acids that we cannot live without. The other 10 amino acids we can actually synthesize from these 10 essential amino acids. Essential amino acids are things like lysine, methionine, tryptophan. These are things that you have to get from your diet. If you don't have them, it can lead to severe malnutrition and really not a good thing for you or your dog or cat. Cats actually have an 11th essential amino acid, and that's a thing called taurine, and that's been in the news over the past 3 or 4 years quite a bit. So that's another amino acid that a cat needs to have in their diet because they can't adequately synthesize it from the other essential amino acids. So we've got 20 that we need to worry about when we're formulating a pet food. Some of them that we can synthesize from the essential amino acids, others that we can provide in the diet if we want to, and then 2 that we don't need to worry about. So we need these specific 20 amino acids, but not only do we need them in specific amounts, and that makes up what's called the amino acid profile of a dog or a cat. There is an optimum amino acid profile for your dog or your cat. That means they need these amino acids in specific amounts, not in excess or not in an amount that is not adequate. They need the right amount to actually thrive and grow and be as healthy as they can be. So when we're looking back at animal or fish proteins, we're thinking, okay, well, how does this break down into those essential and required amino acids that your dog or cat needs to grow and thrive? So when we're looking at things like beef, we might be looking at utilizing potentially a beef rib and a beef heart in the recipe to combine those together to yield a specific mix of amino acids so we can build to that amino acid profile that we're trying to get to in your dog or cat. This works into something called the principle of the first limiting amino acid. And what I mean by that is you saw that last graph I had where your dog or cat may need 3 of this amino acid and 2 of that and 1 of that. Each of those, if you need 3, that's 100% of what you need. If you need 2, that's 100% of what you need of that amino acid. Maybe you only need 1 of another amino acid. That 1 is going to be 100% of what you need of that 1 amino acid. When I look at this, this example here that Doc Roberts came up with back in the 1980s, this is a barrel full of water. And each stave on this barrel, so a stave here is each of these one little things that are going up to the top of the barrel, that represents 100% of each of the amino acids that you need. So one stave might represent 3 of tryptophan, and one stave might represent 2 of taurine or another amino acid that you need. And if you have 100% of what you need that amino acid, you're going to fill that all the way to the top of this barrel. We're going to have a nice full barrel. And you can consider the capacity of this barrel being exactly what your dog or cat can be at their absolute best, that we've met the optimum amino acid profile of what they need to thrive. What I mean by the principle of the first limiting amino acid is if I don't have an adequate amount of a specific amino acid, if I only have, let's say, 2 of the 4 amino acids of tryptophan that I need, that's going to be my limiting amino acid. And what that means is that I can only utilize up to that amount of tryptophan, obviously, but it also means I can only utilize that much of every other amino acid in the diet. So lysine, even though I have 100% of that amino acid, because I'm deficient in tryptophan, means the rest of the lysine in the diet is completely wasted. Your dog or cat has to secrete that from the body. It needs to come out in either their urine or their feces. So if I can't optimize my diet to meet the correct amino acid profile that they need, we end up with a bunch of waste. And not only are we're feeding them nutrients that they cannot utilize, and that's going to be taxing in the body because the body has to figure out how to get rid of those nutrients. And I always love this ad. This is an ad that came out back when my dad came out with the first collaborative product line with Doc Roberts back in 1990s. They said, when it comes to protein in dog food, more isn't better, better is better. And that is just speaking to, it doesn't matter really, it does matter what you put into your pet food, but when it comes down to the ingredients, it's not about how much of what you put in there. It's about how high quality is that ingredient? What is it providing in the diet? And how are you producing it? And how is it really meeting the needs of your dog or cat as far as their nutrient profile that they need? So that's what I mean by complete and balanced. We're looking at the macro, the micronutrients. We're selectively choosing ingredients based upon how they're going to contribute to the fat, the carbs, the protein to the diet. We have our own curated vitamin mineral premix that we have made for us, that we know exactly how that's going to supplement and make sure that we have, if we're deficient in any way in our raw ingredients, our natural ingredients, that we have what we need to supplement that on an ingredient, a micro ingredient mix. We are looking at all these different facets of food, not just what's on the ingredient panel or what ends up on the guaranteed analysis. It's how does it really end up at the end of the day? How is the dog or cat thriving? We do feeding trials in addition to following all the scientific peer-reviewed research that we have access to. It's one thing to read a textbook on how to formulate a complete and balanced diet, but it's also another thing to actually conduct your own feeding trials, do trial and doing feeding trials over time, evaluating different mixes of micro and macronutrients, comparing those, contrasting it. We've got over 70 years of formulating dog and cat foods under our belt. So we've been able to glean a lot, and we're still learning every single day. So that's the first question. Hopefully I answered that adequately. The next question is, are there benefits to rotating your pet's diet? Hey, we're all about rotating within Fromm. So our 4-star line, which you can see here, this was released in 2003. We started with 3 recipes that you could switch between at any time, meaning you could feed chicken a la veg on Monday, duck a la veg on Tuesday. Maybe you do a Friday fish. You do like salmon a la veg or something, or our new trout and whitefish product. These have been designed with similar ratios of macro and micronutrients, but we're utilizing different ingredients to meet the needs of the dog and cat. So yes, it can be okay to rotate your pet's diet. And sometimes it can be beneficial because you are exposing your dog or cat to potentially a different mix of amino acids or a different fatty acid profile. And potentially they're going to do better, they might do better on one mix over another, or rotating through it, make sure they have something that you're exposing them to different things. I really have nothing against that. One thing that I do want to make sure, though, that you do is that you do keep everything in balance. Because if you actually start jumping between brands, different brands can have very different ways that they put their foods together, and they may be really high in protein, or they may be deficient in something else, or just really a different philosophy of nutrition. And when you bounce around between brands that have very different philosophies and how they put their products together, you're asking quite a bit from your dog or cat, their digestive system, to bounce between that. So if you're doing it, I encourage you to reach out to a pet nutritionist. Again, you can reach out directly here. We've got not only Danielle on staff, but we've got in-house veterinarian that if you're saying, hey, I do feed like a mix of raw and kibble, or I do some can, and I want to make sure that I'm doing right by my dog or cat. And hey, sometimes I do like to switch brands. What do you think? We're happy to lend a hand. And I know Cherrybrook's got some great staff on hand as well. I really encourage you, before you just start jumping between different brands, really reach out and try to get some feedback to make sure that you can transition smoothly. Luckily, if you are sticking within the Fromm brand, though, we don't have any major deviations between even any of our product lines. So if you're switching between our Classic or our Gold or our 4-star line, you really can do that on a day-to-day basis once you've transitioned over to the Fromm product line. We also have canned food products as well. So that's also good to add that into your pet's diet. Again, it's going to be a different format. Your mileage may vary depending on how your dog or cat might do with those different forms. Trial and error can be a good thing. The number one problem that we see every day in and day out, is overfeeding. That is the number one solution to the problems that that people reach out to us about, things like diarrhea, or my dog doesn't want to eat anymore. Honestly, people are overfeeding their pets, and there's some crazy statistics out there that we actually publish on our website. If you look up like obese dogs, over 58% of dogs in the U.S. are obese, which is just an incredible statistic. We are overfeeding our animals. And it's really sad. So one thing I really urge you all to do is make sure that you find out exactly what is the energy needs of your dog or cat, and make sure that you're not feeding more than you need to. And we've got feeding recommendations on the bag, but honestly, that's really just a starting point. We need to make sure that people feed enough for their dog and cat, that they don't become malnourished. But really, typically, you're going to feed less than you're going to see on our ingredient panel. And this is another time that I really encourage you to reach out to our customer service team, and we'll put together a optimized feeding plan for your dog or cat. And if you want to work in treats, or you want to work in cans, we're going to take that, and that can or that treat is going to contribute to the overall energy that your dog or cat is eating on a daily basis. And it's going to affect how much kibble you're going to end up feeding them. So make sure to consider the energy needs of your dog and cat, and we're more than happy to do a personalized feeding plan for you. Next, what are the differences between foods formulated for adult, puppy, senior, and all life stages? This is going to come down to that nutrient mix and how are those different things at play. So I'm going to minimize my screen here, jump over to our website. So if I look at our puppy recipe, you can see here we've got 27% protein minimum in our food and 18% fat. We've got a caloric content of 3,849 kcals per kilogram. If I compare that against our adult food, which I showed you earlier, that's 25% protein and 16% fat. And those percentages add up to a noticeable amount in the nutrient composition of the food. And then how we put those foods together is going to take into account how that's going to break down and how it's going to affect the energy needs and especially the growing needs of a puppy compared to the maintenance needs of an adult food. When we look at a senior food, here you can see we've reduced the protein even more. We've got 23% protein, 11% fat, and only 3,475 kcals per kilogram in that food. That's because typically a senior dog or a dog that's reduced activity has lower energy needs. I mean, perhaps they spend, like my 13-year-old Cavalier who's sleeping fast asleep behind me. She's fast asleep for the majority of the day typically. She has a lot lower energy needs than an adult does, and certainly a puppy. When we look at things like breed sizes, we have a large breed puppy gold. Here we've got less protein and less fat than you find in our traditional puppy food because a large breed dog is actually going to take a lot longer to grow than a smaller breed puppy. A small breed dog like my Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, they may be full grown in 7 to 10 months. A Great Dane may not reach full maturity and full growth until up to 24 months. So we need to be very careful as far as what the protein and fat content is, what we're supplying in the product. We want to make sure that we're not supplying too many nutrients, because what can happen, especially with large breeds, is if you have too many vitamins and minerals, which can be taken from other raw ingredients, you can actually have their bones grow too fast and end up with problems that are going to stay with them their entire life. Because if your bones grow too fast, there's not a whole lot you can do after the fact. You're really just looking at managing your dog at that point. So it's really important to get that right when the dog is a puppy. So we take careful consideration when formulating large breed puppy foods. And then we also have a corresponding large breed adult food, which again is taking into account kind of how large breed dogs grow and maintain. We do also have all life stages foods. So that's our entire 4-star line is formulated for all life stages. That means you can feed any of these products from a puppy all the way up to a senior dog. And they're also sufficient for large breed dogs as 70 pounds more as an adult. So you can feed like our surf and turf recipe to a Great Dane or a Mastiff. If you call us and say, what would you recommend? I would still recommend our large breed adult or a Heartland large breed adult food. But of course, they could also thrive on something like our surf and turf, or we've had specific dogs that just tend to do better on fish. So they'll call in and we might put them on our salmon olive veg or our Hassan duck and pfeffer food. And maybe that's just the way it is. If you are going to do that, or if you do find that your dog finds some of our other products more digestible that you might find on our 4-star line, please reach out to us and let us put together a customized feeding recommendation for your large breed dog. Because we're going to look at the specific needs of your dog. What's their current weight? Are they at their optimum weight? We may have our veterinarian get in touch with your veterinarian if there's any health issues that might have happened in the past. We'll do right by your animal. So that is the differences there. Let's get back to our questions. Next question was, why are legumes and pulses common ingredients in pet food? So these exploded back in, I want to say about right around 2010, 2011. We had this new marketing fad in pet foods, which was this thing called grain-free, which was, for whatever reason, marketing companies decided that grains were bad for dogs. And if your dog food had a grain in it, it meant that it was a bad dog food. Absolute no truth to that. No scientific evidence that is the case. But it certainly worked as a marketing trend, because at that point, we saw foods that had whole grains or grains in them, their sales started to decline at a pretty extreme pace. And that picked up year after year to the point where even we didn't come out with a new grain-in pet food, because the ones that we had were declining in sale. Or none of them were declining in sales. They were still growing. But when we came out with grain-free pet foods, they would just skyrocket in sales when we did that. We didn't come into grain-free, though, because it was just a fad. Like, we don't jump onto fads in pet food. We evaluate them. So when this grain-free thing happened, my dad and our R&D department spent over 2 years researching how to formulate a grain-free food. Grain-free foods use pulses because we need to find complex carbohydrates that we can utilize in that diet, again, to supply things like dietary fiber, be an efficient source of glucose for the brain, other things in the body. The body still needs that glucose and that dietary fiber. So you have to provide it to them. And if you're taking really high quality ingredients like complex carbohydrates, like whole grain barley, brown rice, spelt, or these really high quality complex carbohydrates off the table, saying, hey, we don't want your pet food because it has those in them. We need to come up and get creative as what else we can put in the pet food. So what happened was pulses became a way to provide those nutrients in a pet food. Of course, now we've completely reversed that trend, and now grain-free diets are declining and grain-in diets are coming back up. And for us, we never said grain-free was better or grain-in was better. We were tasked with, because it was a marketing trend, to, could we figure out a way to make a high-quality grain-free diet? The answer was, after 2 years of research and development, yes, we could. And I think we have some of the most digestible, if not some of the best grain-free products on the market today. And you'll see that we are using legumes in that product. It was also interesting to see when the trend started, they tended to be like really high protein diets. And as personally, like I look at ingredient panels and I look at that across the entire pet industry. If you were to watch ingredient panels over time, the amount of protein started to decrease in those foods over time. And you saw a increase in carbohydrates back into those products, because I think over time they noticed that these weren't feeding as well. You were ending up with too much protein in a diet. Number one hallmark of too much protein in your dog or cat's diet is going to be stinky stools or diarrhea. Especially that stench that you get, that thing I don't even want to think about right now, that's undigested protein in your dog's gut. So that's going to be one hallmark of too much protein in your dog's diet. So we need these complex carbohydrates. We need that dietary fiber. Fiber or a prebiotic is a type of fiber. And you need those prebiotics to feed the probiotics that we have in these foods. They wouldn't be useful otherwise. This is a nice little thing, again, like we're showing that we're not focusing on necessarily what the ingredient is. We're looking at what's it contributing to the diet. Pea is actually very high in protein. It's certainly not as good a protein for protein synthesis as chicken is. It's nowhere near as good. It's not as complex as a protein. And that's why with Fromm, you're never going to see us having pea as the primary protein in a pet food. It's always going to be that meat or animal protein first, and then we're going to complement that with other ingredients. And pea is going to contribute not only protein, but carbohydrates, even a little bit of fat in there too. And of course, vitamins and minerals. Finally, what are ancient grains and how do they differ from traditional grains? Well, the definition of an ancient grain is, ancient grain is really a marketing term as well. What I've gleaned from the definition is it's a grain that's been minimally processed, or there hasn't been much selective breeding done over like the past 1,000 years. Things like buckwheat or spelt haven't gone through as much like selective breeding or hybridization that we have with things like corn or barley or rice. So there's a lot of marketing things out there, a lot of claims out there. I'm cautious to anybody I talk to. Do your own research, get varying opinions from people. These are all natural ingredients, whether it be brown rice or barley or spelt or buckwheat or categorized as an ancient grain. But again, these all break down into nutrients in your dog or cat's body. And yeah, we have, there's differences in how we grow these different types of raw ingredients. And certainly white rice is going to have a different nutrient profile than brown rice, or organic brown rice grown on one farm might have a varying degree of nutrients than one that might have been done on a very large commercial farm, or it might have been grown with pesticides or not grown with pesticides. All these things are going to contribute to different factors in the supply chain. But just the fact that it's an ancient grain, or that something is grain-free, or any of these buzzwords or marketing terms, be very cautious, because really all these things come down to are nutrients, how these ingredients are processed, and how it breaks down into the cells of your dog or cat's body and allows them to live and thrive and live another day. And I think that's all the questions I had so far. I'm hoping there's a few in the chat room, so I'm going to turn it over to Claudia.
There are a bunch of questions in the chat room.
All right.
So we can get started. I'll ask. Darlene asks, she's heard about pet food made from crickets. And how do you feel about insects being used as a protein source for pet food?
I think it's interesting. Honestly, I think it's interesting. Again, we look at things very scientifically, and I've only looked at it a little bit, but of course, when you're looking at cricket protein, they're looking at, I've watched actually a couple talks on, I think, YouTube or something, where they're talking about what do these crickets break down into specific amino acids, and how do those contribute to what your dog or cat might need in their diet. And these are the same things that we would look at. It's certainly not something that we're looking at currently and putting in our dog and cat foods. Like I said, something like that grain-free diets that we came up with, that was a long time, a lot of research and development, a lot of trials. We didn't do that lightly, and the only reason we did it was because there was such an appetite in the market for those products. Currently, I do not see a very big appetite for cricket food in the pet food industry, so it's not something that we're going to be dumping our R&D resources into currently, because those are a bit more limited than they would be at some of the really, really, really big companies. We're still a relatively smaller company, so we really focus on some of the things that really excite us. And at this time, we're not really looking into crickets, but to me, you asked me the question, do I think it's interesting? Yeah, I definitely do. I love science. I love research and development. I think we've only scratched the surface as far as nutrition, not only with dogs and cats, but I still think we're learning stuff every day about people. So I think the more we can learn in the scientific community and the more we can ask questions, the better off we're all going to be, not only with our dogs and cats, but for ourselves.
Okay. Allison has a question about how can pets eat the same food day in and day out? It seems boring. Is there a healthy way that we can add to our pets' kibble and give them some more nutrition?
See, more nutrition. This all comes back down to balance. So, I think it's fun to feed your pet something different. You don't, with our foods, you certainly don't have to. We have everything there they need. The dogs and cats go crazy over our food. We actually make our own paladin enhancers by utilizing a natural digestion process that we do here on site. So that's what makes our food super palatable, and why my dog literally jumps up like halfway to the counter every night when I fill up her food. I pour some water on that food to activate some of those palatins on the outside of the food. I don't know that dogs and cats necessarily get sick of their food, especially I haven't noticed that with dogs and cats on Fromm feeding the right amount. But yeah, I feed my dog something. I'll switch it up like every month or two and feed her something different. And that's how we feed ourselves. So why wouldn't we do that? I think it's good. I would, again, just caution you to make sure that you're doing that in a balanced way. And there's fun ways to do it, whether it be different formats of food, whether you're feeding cans or kibble or doing some treats, or there's some other enhancers out there by some other brands. Like I know bone broth is a very popular thing. That will be something I might look at if you're looking to kind of switch things up. But I got nothing against it, as long as you keep in mind that your dog and cat do need a specific balance of nutrients.
Okay, thank you. Corrine asks, she was wondering about fiber content. She has a Cavalier who is currently on Fromm, but seems to need more fiber because, they have issues. She has issues with her anal glands. Which Fromm formula would you suggest for a year-old Cavalier with anal gland issues?
Sure. I am not comfortable answering that one. I got some ideas, but honestly, I'm going to defer her to reach out. That would be a good one to actually reach out directly to Danielle about. I know she gets that question quite a bit, and she's done quite a bit of legwork on that specific subject. So I would encourage her to reach out and get an optimal. We'll probably want to learn a little bit more about the Cavalier, the history, why it's been determined that we need more fiber, if there's specific types of fiber that the dog's doing well on. I don't have an easy answer for that, but I'm sure we can get to the bottom of it.
Okay. All right. Can you, you'll give me Danielle's email address. If Corrine, if you want to email me after the presentation, and I'll put you in touch with Fromm, okay? Or you can type it in the chat to everybody. I think
Yep, there. I think that works. Yeah, just Danielle at frommfamily.com.
Okay, cool.
We're pretty personal around here.
Amy asks, if you have a pet who's struggling with weight, should you avoid carbohydrates and stick to a low-carb diet?
Not necessarily, no. Here we're just trying to work on balance and the energy needs of the dog and cat. So if we don't have the right amount of carbohydrates in the product, or if you have like a really low carbohydrate diet, you can actually buy in commercial pet food diets that have 0 carbohydrates in them. Again, that's going to tax the dog or cat because they're going to have to then convert the protein and fat in that food into the needed glucose for their nutrient needs. And that process is going to be taxing. And you're already taxing the body if you have an overweight or obese dog. They're already in a state where they need a little bit of extra care. So I certainly would not go to what would be considered or potentially marketed as a low carb or zero carb diet. You want to get that right balance and get that dog or cat back on track. And the number one way to do that, first and foremost, is going to be cut back on feeding, giving them less of everything up front. A dog can easily go 2 weeks without eating as long as they have adequate access to water. You are not going to kill your dog or cat if they don't eat for 2 weeks, unless they're already malnourished. But dogs especially are feast and famine animals. They did in fact descend from wolves, which is a feast and famine animal. That means they might go a week or two without ever eating again. And when they eventually did find a kill out in the wild, that their body would know that they need to store those nutrients and utilize those over time. So one thing we'll do, especially if we've got like rampant diarrhea going on with one of our customers and we just can't seem to get the gut back in check, we'll actually have them do a fasting period to allow the body to reacclimate, and then we'll start introducing the kibble again into the diet. And a lot of times that's really what kickstarts the body again and gets them back on track. So I'd say before we start changing the amount of carbs in the food, let's start on feeding amount first. And again, if you do have issues, I hope I'm giving you some good information, but honestly, please reach out to our customer service team. We've got an awesome staff, and we will work with you one-on-one.
Okay, great. Zari asks, I understand your canned food lining doesn't have PBA. Why don't you state that on the can?
Because it's technically BPA intent free. So like it's not something that we feel is going to necessarily super important in the canned food product. And technically the product is BPA intent free, and we don't try to make claims that we can't fully back up. So there's not really necessarily, I guess, a good reason that we don't put that out there. We just haven't seen a need to. It's probably not a good answer, but that's the truth.
It's an honest answer. That's good. Karen asks, my dogs have hot paws, and it has been suggested that they may have a chicken allergy. I have switched to one of your fish foods, all fish foods. Can you speak about that?
There's a lot of things I can go into, especially like the itching and scratching in the paws. A lot of that's going to come down to what's happening in the dog or cat's gut and how that's impacting the immune response. It can sometimes be specific proteins in a product. Other times it can be something completely unrelated. So that is really independent of the dog or cat. What we will do typically, though, if we have a customer that is having issues, we will have them try another recipe. So exactly sounds like what she did was try one of our other products. And if the dog's not having an issue with that product, I would be inclined to probably stick with that product. And then if you did want to switch things up, probably something similar. So if she's doing well on like the salmon a la veg, potentially she might do well on the trout and whitefish or something like that. But to say that it was technically the chicken that did it, it's actually more likely than not, it's not the chicken, but maybe something else at play. Chicken gets demonized quite a bit as like the cause of a lot of problems. And the reason for that is there's just a ton more chicken products out there. I've actually got a pretty cool chart I can bring up here.
Cool.
That illustrates this pretty well. Do that. Go to my slides. All right. So this shows you meat supply in the U.S. from 1900 until through 2017. That's what I got the data through. And you can see here what happened with the availability of meat protein. So we got lamb, we got turkey, we got pig, we've got cow, and we got chicken. What happened around the year 2000 is chicken just leapt in front of every other meat protein available. And what this means is there's more chicken available in the U.S. meat supply chain than any other protein, which makes it the most readily available protein, and also makes it the most economical protein to purchase when you're looking for high quality protein. So when you look at pet food, it's no surprise to me that the majority of top selling pet products and the majority of sales done in pet food is all in chicken products. because it's the most readily available, high quality animal protein source that we have access to as a pet food manufacturer. It also helps us that Americans, for whatever reason, love their white meat chicken in their whatever products they're having, and they don't really care so much about the organ meat and the dark meat, which actually there's a lot more high quality nutrients in that organ meat than you're going to find in the muscle meat of the chicken. So it's really become a really, really good supply of high quality protein for pet food. So how this works into this question is, well, a lot of times the question wasn't really related to that. I kind of went off on a tangent, but chicken ends up being like, oh, your problem must be chicken, because the majority of pet food is chicken. It becomes a giant target on its back that, oh, I switched off chicken and all my problems went away, when necessarily it wasn't the chicken that was the problem all along.
Okay. Zari asks, as the owner of more senior cats, I'm concerned about fish iodine and BPA for hyperthyroidism and phosphorus for kidney disease and hormones coming from the meat. Any provisions to address any of these concerns?
I'm going to have to defer that one. I wish I could answer it, but honestly, that would be something Danielle would be much more apt to answer.
Okay. Well, that also can come down to sourcing too, right? So the quality of the ingredients that you source would help mitigate that. But yes, okay, we'll defer that to Danielle. She's going to be very busy after this. And Zari also asks, digestive enzymes are destroyed after cooking the food. Do you add that after cooking?
Digestive enzymes are in your dog or cat's body. So those are going to be created by your dog or cat in their organs. I think what he or she's after is like the probiotics. So probiotics are actually live, viable microorganisms that we add to the food. Those get added after the cooking process. So our product goes through extrusion. From there, it goes through a drying process where we extract out a lot of the moisture that is occurring in that product. And then it's after that drying state that we actually do our coatings. And that's where our palatability agents go on. And it's also where the probiotics go on, where it's put on at a temperature where the probiotics can sustain in a healthy amount. One thing that is kind of fascinating is probiotics, though, do die over time. So over the shelf life of our product, the fresher the product is, the more bioavailable or live microorganisms that are going to be in the product over that product. But we do have trials and data to back up that we do still have live microorganisms, probiotics in that product throughout the full 18 months of the best before date.
Okay. Is that even after the bag has been opened? And
yep, it is. Of course, oxygen is the enemy of pet food or really any food. That's why we have Tupperware that seals up, and all the things that we do in the food supply chain. Oxygen is going to start decomposing our food products. So is airtight as you can make that, the better off you're going to be, not only for the probiotics, but everything else that's going on in the pet food. One thing I do like to mention is we definitely recommend keeping our food in the bag that you purchase it in, and then to take that bag, roll it up, and put it in an outside sealed container. What we see too often is pet parents dumping out their food into a container, and in the effect of like a metal container, you end up just coating the sides of that container with fat that become very hard to wash out. And not that you can't do it, there's definitely food safe storage things you can put the food in, but are you cleaning it every week? Maybe you are. I don't know. But a much better way to do that is to leave it in the bag, so you're not exposing that container to the food itself, and then put the bag in that outside seal container to make sure that we're keeping as much oxygen out as we can to stop the oxidation.
Yep. Okay. Patricia asks, what is your opinion on the fresh canine food trend?
The fresh canine food trend. That is an interesting one that we've been watching. It's essentially cooked food usually, and then frozen and then shipped to consumers. Honestly, it's a lot like glorified canned dog food, because that's what we're doing with canned dog food. It's just we're not freezing it and sending it. We're cooking it inside the can, and then it's getting put and it's shelf stable because we've eliminated all the oxygen in that sealed container inside that can. So really, to me, it's a fad that looks like you're taking a form of pet food that we already have and selling it in a different way. We are exploring that in our R&D department, coming out with something, doing it the Fromm way, because we don't like to just do things because it's a fad. We like to actually contribute to the format and actually add in something beneficial to what's going on. So we are looking at that currently. So it's definitely interesting, and we are definitely watching it because personally, my social media feed has targeted me with all our competitors doing the fresh thing. But is it necessarily better? I've seen no data to suggest that it's a better format to feed your dog or cat. Again, it comes down to how is it formulated? How is your dog or cat going to do on that product? The fact that it's in this fresh, or they want to call it a fresh format, really isn't what we're after.
Understood. Okay. Regina asks, what do you suggest for toy Aussies 8 inches to 14 inches? I'm assuming, what food do you suggest feeding to Aussies? High energy dogs. So
yeah, probably our small breed adult gold. That one's optimized specifically for small breeds. Okay. But the small breeds, it's not as imperative as it is with the large breed dogs to have those specific recipes. A lot of times the kibble size is also going to be an important factor for the small breeds. So like our small breed adult gold's great product. Also, some of our 4-star recipes that are in the smaller kibble size, like the salmonella veg or our surf and turf. Those are 2 that come to mind too, that I see a lot of small breeds on.
Okay. Jason asks if the webinar is going to be available on YouTube later. We don't typically put the webinars on YouTube, but on our Cherrybrook website, we have a link to webinars, and all the past webinars and this webinar will be available to view at any time on our website. That's that. That was a question I could answer. Marcy says, I hear eggs are good for dogs. Do you have a formula with eggs?
You know, it's hard to find our recipes that don't have eggs. Eggs are an incredible protein source. Like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, they're the most complete protein source as far as providing the needed amino acids in a dog or a cat or a human's diet. So you're going to see that on pretty much all of our dry foods. Some of our canned foods don't have eggs in them. But almost all of our dry dog and cat foods, it's going to be one of the primary sources of protein in that product after the meat or fish proteins. And I want to say our beef frittata veg, which like Rita frittata is an egg dish. Our beef frittata veg, I believe it may be tied, or egg might be the primary protein source in there, because the first ingredient is beef. And if I'm not mistaken, I have to look back at the ingredient panel. Dried egg might be the second ingredient.
Okay. So Marcy also goes on to say, should we just give our pets an egg a couple of times a week?
This comes back to that balance thing. So we've formulated our products in a specific nutrient balance. So if you start feeding your dog or cat outside of what we're doing in the kibble, you have the possibility of taking your dog's diet out of balance, because we've very selectively chosen the ingredients that we have and prepared them in a specific way to make sure that we're meeting that right balance that they need. So doing something incredibly high in protein, like an egg, may disrupt the balance depending upon how large that is as the overall, how much of that is part of their overall diet, how big the dog is. It's all gonna be at play.
Okay, we have if you have time, Brian, we can answer a couple more questions maybe, because we've gone over our time limit, but
Sure.
I knew we were going to do that anyway. But how about 2 more questions?
Yeah, what do you got?
Okay, let's see. Lori asks, why doesn't Fromm offer a limited ingredient diet? I have a feeling it's about balance.
It is about balance. It very much is about balance. Limited ingredient. I think internally we've talked about limiting the potential of your dog or cat. A limited ingredient diet really, there's a bunch of definitions. Again, limited ingredient diet is another one of those marketing terms. I've seen it defined as no more than 8 ingredients in your food. That's limiting what we can do, right? So if we can only use 8 ingredients and all of a sudden we have to supply the entire amino acid profile of the dog, the entire fatty acid profile of the dog or cat, be able to supply the complex carbohydrates and be able to have the right amount for probiotics, the right amount to supply the necessary glucose for the animal. it becomes incredibly hard if we're limited with what we have. So we have not come out with anything specifically underneath that umbrella. We certainly have products that utilize less ingredients than others. Like our classic adult dog food is going to utilize less ingredients than something like our some of our more expensive 4-star products that are utilizing like a myriad of fresh fruits and vegetables. The classic's going to be more like your chicken, brown rice, barley, Wisconsin cheese, and of course the probiotic blend in there. But yeah, we definitely have not jumped on the limited ingredient train, because that one is a tough nut, because my entire life, the way my dad was taught, it's about what nutrients are we doing. We need to be able to analyze the product and ensure that we're supplying all the needed nutrients of a dog or cat. And why would we limit ourselves for what we're going to put in that food to meet that, to have that animal thrive?
Okay. So for dogs with allergies, where you're trying a restricted diet, you would offer alternatives within the Fromm line.
No. That's a point where I can jump on limited ingredient, but that's typically for a period of time to figure out what your dog or cat is having an adverse reaction to. So we might start on something like actually cooking brown rice and chicken for a couple weeks at a time, just to identify what might be a triggering ingredient for the dog or cat. But long term, we don't feel that a limited ingredient diet is necessarily going to be the best thing long term. They certainly have their place in figuring out what a problem might be. So that's a great thing to bring up.
Okay. Mark asks about transitioning from one brand of pet food to another brand of pet food. How long a period of time do you need to transition? And how much should you feed? How much should you mix together over what period of time?
Sure. It's going to be dependent on the dog or cat. Everyone comes about change a little bit differently, and also going to depend upon how different of a diet that you're coming from, that you're moving towards. Our general rule of thumb is starting with a 75% of your old food and 25% of Fromm, and then you watch the stools. The stool tells you so much about your dog. I mean, it's not the most fun thing to talk about, but you're looking for firm, consistent stools. Once we've hit that with the 75-25 mix, we say move on to the 50-50. Once you've hit a consistent stools again, move to 25-75, and then finally moving on to 100-100. Usually within 1 to 2 weeks, you're good, but it really depends on the dog or cat and what's going on.
That's the exact same advice we offer in the store for transitioning to a new brand. Okay, one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Go for it.
Optimum amino acid profile. Does that differ by breed, by individual dog or cat? I mean, does every dog have the same optimum amino acid profile?
It is going to vary not only by breed, by species, by your individual dog or cat is going to have an optimal amino acid profile. So yeah, the way I presented it was kind of makes it look cut and dry, but honestly, that was the best way for me learning about this, because you can get really deep into the science of pet food and how it all goes together. But yeah, we're really looking to get into a range that's going to be for the majority of dogs and cats. And yeah, your dog or cat might thrive better on one of our products versus another. Or if we get to a point with a customer that we don't have the right product from, that happens too. Their dog or cat might have needs that we can't meet, and we'll be the first to admit that if we feel that's the case.
Okay.
But we've had incredible success over the past 70 years with our foods. That incredibly healthy dogs. People write into us every day about their dogs. We get pictures. We've fed some of the top show dogs in the world. Like I said before, those sled dogs are on the product that Eric Morris, the PhD biochemist, and my dad put together. When you look at a product like that that's feeding Iditarod dogs, they have to be the most optimized animals in the world to be able to go through that 1,000-mile race every year. So we've done a ton of research, and we feel like we've really dialed in that amino acid profile that we target. We target that range with pretty much all of our products.
Okay, great. All right. That's it for the questions from the participants this evening. I want to thank you, Bryan, because this has been, an incredible presentation this evening. Everybody will be receiving the recording and the email. You'll be receiving an email within the next 24 to 48 hours. And in that email will be a few offers from Fromm as well. a special offer on canned food and $7 off any size bag of the new
trout and whitefish.
Thank you, trout and whitefish. Thank you guys, everybody. If anybody has a question, my email is up there. Also Danielle's email. Bryan provided that. We're getting lots of thank yous in. Thank you, Colin. Oh, I see. Colin noticed that I was wearing a Fromm shirt tonight. Colin is our rep for Fromm. So thank you, everybody. Bryan, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
You have a great night, all. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.